Welcome to an episode of Stratospheric Leaders, where I get to have extraordinary conversations with change makers who are influencing and reshaping the industry in meaningful ways. Today, I have the privilege of sitting down with Sara Furber, CFO of Tradeweb. This conversation is packed with insights, and it is one you definitely don't want to miss. So, Sara, I am delighted to welcome you to an episode of Stratospheric Leaders, and thank you for hosting me in your offices in this wonderful studio.
This is great. I'm so excited that you're here. You finally made it in the snowstorm.
I did. After the snowstorm. I'm not used to weather like this in the UK.
We're barely used to it here.
But it's amazing actually how efficient the city is at moving the snow.
I'm surprised. It's actually been pretty clear, except for these like small intersections where it's just like muddy puddles. Most of the streets have been cleared.
Yeah, I need new snow boots. That was like my shoes that I'm wearing today, and not practical. Well, look, you are CFO of Tradeweb and also on the exec committee, and you are a very senior leader within the industry and an inspiring role model to many. And today I really wanted to dive in and hear more about the lessons that have informed your career. But before we go there, I want to speak about childhood, where it all started. So if we could go back to the mini Sara, what did you dream of becoming growing up?
Well, both my parents are doctors.
Okay.
And so as I think with a lot of people who have parents that are both doctors, all of their friends are doctors. And so maybe my dreams were not ambitious, which could be a theme for later. But I think I always envisioned that I would be a doctor. I think they always envisioned that I would be a doctor. And so even when I went to school, I went to study biomedical engineering, thinking that would be my path. And then ultimately that's not where it ended up. But that was originally the plan.
So where did it all change? Like from that was the plan?
Yeah.
And then the plan pivoted. What was the catalyst?
So I think it's interesting. There's probably like a series of things that make you ultimately come to different decisions. Probably the strongest reason was I actually worked in my father's office. My father's a surgeon, and I was a receptionist in his office, and he would have me come in when some of the nurses were busy to help him, like just stand here and hand me things while I'm, doing this and putting stitches in and what have you. And what I realized was like, I really don't love the sight of blood. And I remember, he had someone who had really like damaged their hand with a firecracker. And I remember him being like, can you hand me this? And I was like, sure. Can you hand me this? Sure. And then the third one, I was like, I'll be right back. And I remember going to the pantry and like opening the freezer and sticking my head in and being like, I don't know if this is going to be for me. So that was probably the biggest inflection point in terms of deciding maybe this isn't the right path. And I switched from biomedical engineering to mechanical engineering. And then, when I graduated, I ultimately started working in finance. And then that just led me to a path, like in a different direction. But, probably the biggest pivot was really around that moment of being like, well, I better try some other things because this one might not go so well if I faint in the OR.
Yeah, I'm thinking that was probably a warning sign early on, not the pathway to follow. And when did your ambitions start? Like, I mean, would you consider yourself as ambitious?
I think about that question, and that's probably like one of the interesting dynamics. I don't consider myself ambitious in many respects, and I think most people would say like, oh, I think of you as very ambitious. So there's a slight difference in what that word can mean to different people. I was raised in a way where it was always really important and really valued to care a lot about what you were doing. To do your best, not to be the best, but to be among the best. If you're going to do something, do it the right way. Don't like half-ass. I don't know if you can say ass on this, but don't half-ass it, right? Really, like if you're going to do it, commit and do it with care and with a lot of attention to detail. And so from a young age, whether it be academically or whether it be working, I always cared a lot about how I was producing. I cared about how I showed up. And I took a lot of pride in what I did, but it was never about arriving or achieving or some tier that I had this aspiration of like, I want to get here.
Yeah.
It wasn't that directed. It was just, I want to be among the best. I'm really motivated around smart people. And I want to be respected in that group. And so it's a little bit different, I think, than how a lot of people define ambition. But it's been an interesting journey. I've sort of backed into, I think, some of the successes that I've had without overtly planning or really aiming in that direction. Like, ironically, I would say many times I was probably aiming like at a much different direction, and people are like, no, you're aiming too low.
But what's interesting there is that quality of care, being around the best, doing your best, that the outcome is these extraordinary roles that you've held.
Yes.
But that's been the probably maybe unintended output
Totally
of just
unintended.
the application.
Yeah. No, I mean, I can think of, I'll give you an example. I remember I started my career after I graduated in investment banking. I started as an analyst. I worked my way, never went back to business school. I went and became an associate, and then I was a VP. And around those years, I got married. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm married and I want to start a family. And gosh, I'm on the road 4 days a week. I'm up at 6, I'm home at 10. This lifestyle is not one that I, at least at that time, could picture having in the way I wanted to have a family, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to be home more, and I just was like struggling to think about how that would all come together. And I remember I went to this woman who was the chief operating officer of banking, a very senior woman. And I said, I think I could be the business manager for this group, the banking group that I was in. And she was like, mm-hmm. And I was like, no, I think I'd be really good at it. I think I'm really organized. I think I'm strategic. I think I could, figure out how we run things in the group, but I don't want to be a banker. I don't want to be traveling and client facing. And I'm trying to figure out, if this would be the right balance for me. And she's like, so wait, tell me again why you don't want to do banking. I was like, well, I really want to start a family. I don't want to travel as much. Yeah. And I remember she said to me, which, by the way, I don't think a man would ever say, like in her position, call me when you're pregnant. And until then, let's think about something that you want to do, but you've got to aim much higher. If you want to come here and tell me you want my job, I'll work with you. But no, I'm not going to let you go into this job because right now you're not being ambitious enough. You're looking at a job that you know you can do. And I want you to think about a job that is something you're not sure you can do. Mm. And I remember being like, wait, did you just tell me no, I can't? And to call, it was just like had my head spinning. But the concept of what she said, which is, no, you need to aim higher, really is like one that I come back to over and over in my career. Because in my mind, and I think we often have this when you're thinking about taking on something new, can I do it today, right? Can I do it today? And unless I feel like I can do 100% of it today, I'm not sure that I should even aim for that role. And that was probably like the first inkling both of maybe I wasn't as ambitious as most people thought, or I didn't vision myself that way. But ultimately it turned out, to be great advice. And if I fast forward, a lot of things happened in the few years ensuing that. But ultimately, the job I ended up having within maybe 2 or 3 years of that conversation was her job. And I hadn't aimed for it, and I got there kind of sideways. But it's an interesting thing when you look backwards, and you're like, she made that comment, it kind of redirected me. And actually, ironically, what she said I should aim for ended up what had happened. But I never would have put my hat in the ring and been like, oh, this is what I want to do.
But isn't it interesting where in life it can be a single conversation that can completely...
Totally.
We look at the world differently. Mm-hmm. And isn't it amazing that someone could see a pathway you couldn't see for yourself and believed in you? It's a bit like parents with children. When we tell our children we believe in them, they then they believe in anything is possible.
Yeah.
And that advice she gave you, I mean, clearly that left such an imprint, and it was such a profound piece of advice that she gave you.
I think. And I say this now, kind of being in the other part of my career where I feel like I want to put as much energy back into the system in terms of how I motivate people or how I can help them in their careers. But the notion of dreaming bigger, the notion of not focusing on what you don't know how to do, but really recognizing what you do bring to the table, I think it's a really hard thing, especially early on in your career, to capture. And when people see it in you and they have this confidence that you don't feel, it encourages you to take that jump into the pool. Yeah. It gives you the support that you need to say oh, and maybe it's not all going to be balloons and fireworks, but someone's believing in me, and it keeps you tethered. Oftentimes, it's the catalyst to allow you to kind of make these different jumps. And oftentimes when you look backwards, it's these moments that led to you taking this jump, and this jump leading you into such a different exposure or direction, when you trace it back, it's interesting how you can see those moments really clearly, but in the middle of it or like going through it, you're like, oh, this is just another conversation we're having on a Monday afternoon at 4:00.
But I think there are, when we look back, there are always moments that have shaped us.
I agree with that.
And isn't it interesting? I think it's especially with women, we don't dream big enough.
No.
There's a great quote. I think it's Ralph Waldo Emerson. He says, "I dream my painting, I paint my dream." And when I work with entrepreneurs, they dream big. They are boundless. And when you and I also think when you talked about that leader, she wouldn't be saying something if it wasn't true. So I think when people are giving us that advice, they see the untapped potential. So they're the unlock.
Yeah. No, I think that's entirely true. And I think, I always find there are different people who say different things to you at different points. I remember that conversation with her was just an unlock for me when she was like, "You're not aiming high enough." It hit me in a way where I was like, wait, I feel like I'm actually really good and I am aiming high. I'm just thinking about all these other things. And the other part of what she said, though, was don't try to plan everything out, right? Which was like, oh, call me when you're pregnant. And I remember being like horrified at that comment, but actually like really laughing about it now. She's like, life doesn't always happen at the pace and the way you think about it. And you kind of think about all these series of glide paths that you're trying to create. And a lot of times as you traverse that course, it doesn't feel like you thought it was. The things that you thought happened won't, necessarily happen that way. And so she also, I think, really opened that aperture for me around, you can kind of take it in the moment. You can take the ball as it comes to you as opposed to trying to orchestrate everything and be a little bit freer with your choices. And therefore, I think take a little bit more risk.
I'm very much like the orchestrator. I remember my coach once saying to me, she said, you try to do A to B, B to C, C to D, just like take A to B, and she said, take the next step, and the next step will reveal itself. Because you take the next step, you have more data, more information, more experience, yet you want to see the whole plan, but you're going to be missing things.
Totally.
So, but it takes quite a lot of courage to, especially, I love planning, it takes quite a lot of courage to just believe in yourself and trust that things are going to work out.
Yes.
But I think when we trust, then it's interesting to see what's possible. I suppose the more you exercise that muscle, there's a pattern being like, when I trusted myself, this is what happened as a result.
You know what I think of when you say that? Not only, like, you're talking about the positive reinforcement in terms of like, okay, now I see the positive effects and I'm going to do it again. Of course, my brain went to like the counter of that. But one of the other things that I think was a learning for me was sometimes you're just so wrong, right? Like for me personally, sometimes when you're doing that planning because you based it on the information you have today or the seat and the life you've lived, you're visioning like, okay, this is what I want because this is what it'll be like over here. And what ends up happening is, for me, I've learned along the way, I'm like, actually, it was so wrong. I'll give you an example. I remember in some of those conversations, probably with that same woman, I remember thinking, I don't know if I want to aim so high. I don't know if I want to aim for your job or be CFO of an organization or have these like really visible leadership roles. And it wasn't because I didn't think I could do it necessarily, but it was around like, I just don't know if I'm going to have all this flexibility. That feels like all of a sudden I'm going to lose some element of control, which when you're a planner, you like, some element of control. And I won't be able to go home Tuesday at 5:00 when I want to do it. I won't be able to spend time over here because that seat is so visible and the demands for it are so robust. There's just going to be so much less ability to have control over the way I want to spend my time. At least that was like in my mind, the correlation, right? And I'm also like a nerdy CFO, which is like, there's a regression line, like, more responsibility, less control, like boom, straight regression. And ironically, for a lot of different reasons, I ended up in like increasingly more visible, more prominent leadership roles. And honestly, like we can unpack that. But as I ended up there, I remember having this moment of being like realization, wait, I was so wrong. I thought I would have so much less control with these very senior roles. And actually, I control so much more. I get to decide when the meeting is, who's going to work for me. I have better people working for me. I have more leverage. I have just way more opportunity to navigate to create outcomes and time management and this, the priorities that I want. And it was like, in my CFO nerdland, it was like inversely correlated. And so I think for me, it's that recognition of a lot of times you can be bright and you can have like a lot of life experience, but on the forwards, sometimes it's hard to really assess the situation when you haven't been in it. And so, making all these assumptions and thinking because X will happen, Y will happen, you can be really wrong. And that almost, I think, for me, liberated the dynamic of taking risk. You're like, it could be great, it could not be. You kind of do just have to take it as it comes and then reevaluate with more information, more time having passed.
Because you don't know what you don't know.
No, you don't. And like in my, world, I was like, there's times where I've been right, but there's times where I've been really wrong. So we're just going to kind of go with it and reevaluate as we go.
And out of interest, do you have an internal board of directors, like people who are your sounding boards, your advisors? Do you have like a tribe? And so like what are the types of people in your tribe? Is it work people? Is it friends? Is it family? And what are the hats that they wear?
It's so interesting. When you said internal board of directors, I was like, no, not another board of directors. I do have a tribe. And I think, everyone does. I think about their different dimensions of the people's advice that I really value. And it ranges. My father, obviously both my parents, but like my father has this, unrelenting, you can do anything sort of spirit that he just brings that confidence. And from when I was early, always was like, treated me no differently. It's like there's nothing that's a limit. And I think you kind of bring that, and it's like a really safe grounding mechanism. Only wants the best, right? Like there's no like ulterior motive or anything with someone who's like so close to you in that way. I think of my husband, who's just got a completely different way of engaging with the world. And he's like the storyteller and extroverted. I'm introverted. And so like sees things and sees people's motivations and dynamics in a completely different way. And so he's been a great sounding board. I'm like, why would anyone do this? And he's like, oh my God. He's like, let's start at the beginning. I think about one of my closest friends from college who is not in finance at all, right? Okay. She's a film producer, and she spends her time doing really creative things with completely different people, and how helpful it is to have conversations with her that unpack some of this like small echo chamber that you can easily like grow up in if you spent 25 years in finance in New York, which is basically my career. So those people come to mind like in this element of all the things that are left of the center day to day that I live in. And then I think about the handful of people, from the very early points in my career who helped, like that woman give me advice, another very senior leader at the first part of my career at Merrill, all the way to someone like Billy, who's the CEO at Tradeweb, in terms of those are people who have a diverse set of experiences and yet know me really well or see me operate in a way where when you want to engage on a topic, they're already up to speed, right? Like you don't have to explain yourself or what motivates you or what excites you, but they can see the world from this like really 360 view. And so for me, the combination of those things is like such an important tribe, right? And I like balance, right? From my like, if I always think about the thing I pride myself most on having, it's a real sense of judgment that's not over-rotated in one direction. And I think that's a reflection of that tribe that I value, that's coming in like all these different categories and not just from one side or another.
Because I think, the reason I asked about the tribe, one thing that often comes up in the coaching work I do is where leaders speak to the loneliness that comes with the seat. And I think there's a big difference between being alone and feeling alone, because leaders are not alone, friends, family, their teams of people around them. And yet there is such a responsibility that comes with the seat. I think the world is moving at pace, a relentless pace. And so that feeling of isolation, which is where the trusted tribe, it's like we all need places where we can vent, let off steam, and equally just take the corporate mask off. Because, I see leaders who have sometimes, aging parents, children who are going through challenges. And yet when they're in that work seat, there's an expectation that, people see leaders like yourself sometimes as avatars. And you're human, you're going to have days where you move mountains and days where things are more challenging.
Yes. I think you're totally right. And I it's funny, I don't often put myself in that category. But I often say, because I spend a lot of time and I've worked with a lot of different CEOs, I'm like, that's the loneliest seat I've ever seen. But I think you're right. I think as a leader, there can be times where that's true. What's interesting, and part of this is just the ethos of, I think, how I make decisions. I'm very introverted, right? So if you ask me, like,
I wouldn't know. You see, I'm introverted.
Fake news right now.
Okay, but I'm introverted. But people always think I'm extroverted. But I can be very chatty one-on-one. But give me a big room of people.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also it's like, what do you find like energizing, right? And so like I was like, ooh, a warm cup of coffee. It's a little dark. The music's on and no one's around. I was like, that's super energizing. But what's interesting about that is I'm introverted. And so I like my alone time. But in a work context around making decisions, I love being around people who know things I don't know.
Yeah.
Right? I love my team that is better at everything that they do than I do.
You've got the Avengers.
Yes, but I live for that, right? I'm like, you know something I don't know? Like, I'm all in. Like, let me understand. And in a way, I think that characteristic, that curiosity, that like enjoyment of I don't know, and I'm often putting myself in new situations where I'm like an inch deep and everybody else is like, fathoms deep, allows me to feel like I'm never alone in making tough calls and decisions. Or if I do, I feel like a lot of people's input has been given and I can feel comfortable making the final call because it's informed. And so, in some respects, I always joke, like the CFO seat, I was like, it's a lot of like decisions that nobody else wants to make and the shot clock goes off around a public company before a lot of other shot clocks go off, right? Like you have to make the decision because it's the end of the month, the end of the quarter. And everyone's like, well, I want to think about that a little bit longer. Like, nope, can't. We've got to just deal with what we have. But in a way, I think having that surrounding team and feeling really good about the things that I'm getting from that, including the things that I don't know, it actually has taken any element of loneliness out of the seat. For me, I actually don't ever feel like that in a work context, which is really, I think, kind of remarkable now that you're pointing it out.
But what I hear from you, there's real confidence and trust in the people you have around you. And I think if you've got that level of confidence and trust, and there's a real learning agility of being comfortable with, like, I can't be fathoms deep all the time. Sometimes I am an inch of an expert, but like that has to be okay because I know people in my team, are deep. One of the other things that certainly comes up for me with leaders is, and I was asked this the other day, do I think leaders are more resilient than and I want to hear your answer before I give mine. Because
I was going to ask you to go first.
Okay, well, I'm very because companies have operational resiliency strategies, and as individuals, and my sense is yes, I think the baseline is definitely higher. I think if you are in a leadership seat. You just look at, schedules, travel. Yeah. You talked about decisions. You're having to make decisions with incomplete data. You're having to run to tight timelines sometimes. And so I think that mental and physical, or physiologically, you have to be able to do it. So I think the baseline is higher. And I think the more you exercise that muscle, the stronger it becomes. So I don't think everyone could do a leadership job. I think maybe when FAIR wins, but certainly if we look at the volatility and everything that's happening now, it takes a certain type of stamina and ability to take yourself out of the minutiae, filter out the noise. Yeah, that's a skill. So, what would be if someone said to you, do leaders, do you think they're more resilient than?
I always hate like comparative things in terms of more or less than anyone else, but I do think to be a really good leader, like to be the kind of leader that I really respect, there is an element of resilience and, for me, a lack of volatility, right? In terms of how you are able to lead. Like leading is having people follow. It's having people be motivated. It's having people understanding where you're going. And in order to do that most effectively, in my view, the resilience factor is around being able to absorb all these exogenous factors, right? Yeah. The context switching, the market volatility, the business volatility, the different personalities, the different demands, the time crunches, as you had just like enumerated. But to absorb that chaos in a way and still not lose that even keel calmness of mind, calmness of interaction, to keep your eye, like as you're saying, on the prize. That's the resilience is actually like, it's less about endurance, although like, let's be honest, there's definitely moments of endurance, but it's the resilience in terms of not getting stretched so much that you snap and being able to absorb the shock, digest, and then make the decision. That's the key, I think, around really steady leadership.
Yeah.
And everyone has different styles about this. Like with my team that we just discussed, one of the things I always try to aim for is that calmness and that predictability, right? I always say, like, I don't want to be boring, but I do want to be predictable. Because as a leader, if you can allow the people around you to have a sense of how you think, what you're going to care about, it allows them so much more independence, right, to make decisions. It's like 80% of the time I know exactly what she's going to ask me and what she's going to say.
Yeah.
And then I know on this 20%, like we might have different views and we're going to talk about it. And so that's another element, around like when I think about what really elevates leadership, because you can actually impact a really big group of people with that sort of both calmness and also predictability, as opposed to otherwise it's got to be a one-on-one interaction because you never know what I'm going to say, right, or what I'm going to do.
Yeah, and I sometimes have this with individuals. They're like, I wonder how that person's going to show up today, because there's a real lack of consistency.
Right.
So, good day, bad day. And I want to pivot. You've 3 children.
Yes.
And you've referenced, found how do you make all the pieces of your life fit?
Oh my God, do they ever fit perfect? It's like a jigsaw puzzle. No, they don't fit. I have 3 children, 2 16-year-old boys and a 14-year-old girl. So they're all in high school. And a husband and a dog, and obviously a family that I've talked about and lots of friends. I always, and this is so sad, but as a CFO, like I do think about budgets, like even in a domain that includes my personal life, I think about what's important, right? Like in the grand scheme of like what matters to me, my relationships with this set of people, including my children as an example. And then I am very pragmatic in terms of like, okay, if they're the most important thing on my list, can I spend the least amount of time with them relative to all these other things that I'm doing? Yeah, that doesn't work. Doesn't mean I have to spend the most, but I can't spend, I can't have no hours. I can't have no nights. I need to really make sure that I have the time to engage with the people that I think are most important. And so when I say like I have a budget, when they were really young, I had things like, okay, I want to make sure that I'm not out more than 3 nights in a week. For business. I need at least 2 nights during the week, which I know like I'm going to be home. And so like you travel for a week to Asia and you're like, oh, there go all 5 or 7 nights. But then for the next 3 weeks, you'd balance it out. Yeah. And so I think about my time around making sure that for the people, for my kids, the things that matter, that over the course of a week or a month, that budget, that internal budget of where I want my time to look at the end of the month has kind of been hit. And it's not just about quantity, it's about, the quality of what you're doing or the things that you choose to show up for. But for me, who maybe like you has a tendency to say like, oh, I can do that, I'll do that. It's been like this ruthless editing function. I was like, nope. Not going to like hit the target of kind of what I want if I keep saying yes to this, or if I say one more hour for that, I'm going to miss this moment or dinner or, showing up for their game.
The opportunity cost, isn't there? Of every...
It makes you ruthless about editing. Is it really worth me not doing what I said was important to me over the course of a reasonable period of time? And that for me is like, I constantly am adapting. So I'm never making it fit the way I want every day. Yeah. But over a period of time, I feel like I'm making it fit. And then like, I think one of the things I've learned to do as I've gotten older is listen to myself a little bit more. Like, I remember talking to probably one of my coaches and she was like, well, what are you feeling? I'm like, feeling? I mean, I'm thinking. She's like, no, what are you actually feeling? I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. I have like 5 feelings that I could actually acknowledge. But I've learned a little bit that inner sort of voice of like, it doesn't feel like you're spending that time or you're connecting that way or you kind of know what's going on, and allowing myself to say, okay, like let's reorient and make sure that I can, make more room for this. And that can be in a work context too, which is like, this isn't going the way I want. Maybe I need to think about spending some different kind of energy or focus on this. But I think every year I kind of think about like, what are the things I want to make time for? And they may not be the same. Some things are the same. Like my kids are always on the list, but it can change from year to year.
But I love what you said, ruthless editing. It wasn't just editing, it's ruthless editing.
It's got to be ruthless.
And I think there are so many asks of you. And I remember someone saying to me, like, no is a choice, yes is a magnitude of commitment. Mm-hmm. And before you say yes, kind of exercise the power and the pause. If I'm saying yes to this, what am I saying no to? And no might be dinner with your children. And it's exercising that level of discernment that's not always easy. Is it Ulid Kipchoge? He's a Kenyan athlete runner. He talks about people taking the vitamin N, which is a vitamin N, but it's a vitamin no, like the power of saying no, not now. And for me, when I look at really like successful leaders, that ruthless editing that you talked about, the power of saying no, saying no it becomes a superpower.
And it's interesting. For me, like in the beginning, it was about saying no to something that was like a dinner or an event or a conference. The ruthless editing, and you're hitting on this with your analogy, it's a little bit different. It's, do I have to do this? Mm. Does it have to be done right now? Right? Mm. That question and allowing yourself to slow down. Because a lot of times what's gotten you to the place that you are in your career is like, oh, I can do that really well and I can do that really quickly and I can overfunction. And you want the product to be so good, right? Like, because I said, I take a lot of pride in my work. But now as you think about being a leader and all of those demands and also wanting to make room for all the people who you want to keep developing their career, I ask myself now the series of questions of like, how do I slow it down? Do I really need to be the one to do this, to show up to this meeting? Who else could do it? And when does it really need to come to pass? And just that moment of slowing down enough to ask that question, like the editing, it doesn't feel as ruthless. Maybe it's still as ruthless, but it doesn't feel that way because you're out of that like staccato moment and you've taken the time to say, wait, there's actually like a different aperture here.
A client recently shared an analogy where he talked about as leaders, it's about being the seaplane, the surfer, the snorkeler, and the scuba diver. And he said there's different right. Different levels at different times. But if you're scuba diving all the time, then you're kind of in too deep. But he said it's about being that seaplane at times and it's taking time to be the seaplane because there you see possibilities, you get perspective, you see pathways that you don't see when you're scuba diving because you're on the seabed, whereas up there's more perspective. But that takes really deliberate intention, doesn't it? To say, actually, I need to slow down. And we're used to going at pace, and often the world rewards pace. But actually, there's such a gift when you slow down to be very conscious in your decision making, rather than just going and not everything feeling like an aligned yes.
It's a great visual. I mean, it's so spot
Brad
on.
Levy. I don't know if you know Brad Levy.
Yes, I do.
That's his analogy.
It's a really good one, and I think it's incredibly on point. And it's hard to tell when each of those are going to be the most useful perspective to have, but it's really easy to tell when you're only in one of those levels for too long.
And also I think it's having the truth tellers around you, whether it's Billy or your husband, to be like, because sometimes we can't see things that others can see, which is where it is having those relationships.
Having a little mirror up to
Having
you.
a mirror. Yeah. We all need mirrors. My children are my best mirrors.
Yes.
Do children like...
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I was going to ask about feedback later, but what's one piece of, again, the reason I say this because I was laughing, my children the other day said, you've got so many snakes on your forehead. They were talking about my lines. And I was like, no, this is just, I'm as we were talking about, I'm saging rather than aging. Yes. I'm getting more wise. The lines come with it. But what's one piece of feedback your children have given you that's caused a bit of a rub?
I mean, I would tell you the slowing down, right? They're, the kids are very articulate, and they cut to the chase, like really quickly in terms of how they feel about things. And maybe certainly more so than the way I grew up, I'd say most of my generation, they're very comfortable articulating exactly how they feel and what they think is happening. So as an example, I can kind of go really quickly, like, wait, this needs to get done, this, like, task masking, like organizing. I was like, and I have 5 minutes and we've got to do these like 10 things. And they're like, you're really frustrated because XYZ happened, or like Cole did this or Dad did that, and now you're just kind of like and they show you that mirror of how you're interacting, right? In those 5 minutes at your home, the first 5 minutes that you get there with them, and they're playing it back to you. They're like, I know why you're doing this. It's not judgy. They're not like, oh, you're so bad, mom, like, because you're like asking me to do all this stuff, like empty the dishwasher or whatever it is. But they're doing something where they're like, hey, recognize this frustration or this moment has caused you to act like this. And so that has been really interesting feedback because they're really like quick to point that out. And for me, it's been a really good catalyst to be like, you know what? You're right.
Yeah. And it comes from a good place, doesn't it?
Yes.
It's a positive
and you're like,
intent.
I can slow down and actually see like this a little bit differently. And also like, you know, like what we were talking about earlier, it's like, okay, how am I feeling about this thing right now? And then therefore, how is that coloring either what I'm going to do next or what I'm going to say next or, you know, how I'm thinking about like where we're trying to aim. And that notion of taking that beat, it's like it's always reinforced by them because I think they're very, you know, the way that they see the world is much more nuanced and layered. You know, they don't have the same, you know, they have like lots of time commands, but it's not the same like context switching as much as I think a day in the life, you know, sitting in the offices here are. And so for them, it's just like very natural to see like, this tempo feels off in this moment.
And because it's people who care about us, I mean, if my children give me feedback, I don't always, but I'll listen and I'll be even if I don't like it, I'll be like, there's a seed of truth there. And it's interesting you talked about feelings because I think when we are corporate athletes, we don't always, you know, when your coach said to you, your feelings, you're like, well, I thought there's only 5. And
I say I was like 8 crayons in my Crayola box that are 8 feelings and like, that's
there's like tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands. But our body is always whispering to us. Like it can't talk, but it can tell you how you feel about something. Do you feel excited? Do you feel anxious?
Yeah.
It's speaking to us all the time. And if we actually tune in to listen to it, but we're often so disconnected because we're frenetic and moving. And it's a really, I suppose, good call from her to be like, how are you feeling? Because it requires you to go inward.
Right.
And just check, you know, that self-check-in.
Yeah. No, and I think it's totally a very like good cue for me. And even with the kids, I tease them. I was like, they're so I hear them talk, whether it has anything to do with me or not. They're so articulate about how they feel about something. Like, and I joke with them. I'm like, oh, you have 64 crayons or 126 crayons in your crayon box. I've never even articulated that feeling. But now that I hear you say it, it's like it's an interesting insight. So, you know, they're quick to point things out, but there are moments where you're seeing, whether it's your kids or someone else you work with or a friend, doing something, acknowledging how they feel, taking that moment, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, that's a good idea, right? Like I can learn from that. And so it's been interesting on that front. I've watched them do a much better job than I think I ever did at that age, and certainly like until recently even was aware of.
I think one of the things I've certainly learnt with emotions is it's maybe more empathetic, the more I've understood emotions, because putting myself into the shoes of others, because I can very easily take things personally. Someone's a little bit abrasive, they're direct, and I might think it's a personal slight. But actually, when you understand the range of emotions, you put yourself into the shoes of others, you know, often we don't know what's going on for someone that might be presenting itself in a certain way, and it's not about you.
Right.
But
it's almost never about you, right?
But we can make it about us, which is... So I want to ask about your leadership. How would you describe your leadership style?
You know, I talked a little bit about this. My role as a leader is to set a clear vision, be able to articulate it clearly, articulate how I think it's practical that we're going to get there, and then really to motivate. And the reason I say to motivate, and obviously it depends on like what the size of the team is and what in particular you're focused on, is for me, that has the most leverage in the system. Like, how do I encourage you to be the best version of you? How do I morph myself? Some people want tough love. Some people need a lot of encouragement. Some people want reach assignments. Some people want to do things that they know they're going to do really well. As a leader, I think you're really trying to do that on the biggest scale that you can reach. And so for my style, it's being able to do that really well. And then in your analogy, knowing how to triage, where do I need to scuba dive, right? And so setting that broader leadership vision, being a good communicator, but to really empower the team to make decisions, and then get my hands super dirty and go deep and unpack things where it needs it, but not to like over micromanage anything that's working really well. And so, for me, it's this duality, and like we talked about balance or versatility. Like I like to operate at a high level and be able to explain things that are really complicated at a really high level, but I also like to understand how things work.
And so how do you background?
Total, right? Like I was like, I just need to unpack it and organize it, and then I can like walk away from it. But as a leader, it's for my team, I think knowing that I'm able to do this so they can go do their thing without me. That if things require more intervention, they want it, or it's not working, or someone needs their back, or like more that I can go all the way in.
Yeah.
And we can get really deep, and we can do that. And I think that ability to do that day in, day out, that trust is built over time. I think that's really important as a leader. Like I want to be respected and I want to be trusted. But I want to earn that. And in some respects, I think you have to be there for some period of time to do, to really earn that in its full continuum.
And I think it goes back to the consistency. It's do what you say what you'll do. People.
Yes.
And to your point, I think, trust. I mean, sometimes I think people give trust and it's yours to lose. But I think a lot of, many people, it's like you need to demonstrate that again, if the vision that actually you believe in it, and you're on this journey with us, and it is about winning the hearts and minds of people. And I think when you win the hearts and minds, it's amazing what people will do for you when they believe in the vision. And so often not so often, I sometimes see within organizations, not everyone can speak to the vision. And for me, it's like anyone within the organization, from the most senior levels down to the associate analyst, everyone should be able to say, this is the direction of the company.
Yes.
And that's, the responsibility of the C-suite, and as well as their titles, being the chief repetition officer of, reminding people this is the vision, this is how we're going to execute it. And I think it was, who was saying the other day, BlackRock, they have an all hands every Monday, which everyone in the company is invited to.
Oh, wow.
I think it's Steve Schwartzman, isn't it, and John Gray, who speak about, they'll speak about maybe stuff that's going on in the markets, but again, talk about the vision. So everyone's got access to a base level of information. Everyone shows up for it because no one wants to not be part of the information flow.
No, I think for an organization, having that clear vision, and I think then there's a special next level around having the feeling of a personal connection. I think when leaders can expose enough of like their own personality or the way that they think, where it doesn't feel like a clinical vision, but it feels very genuine.
Yeah.
And to your point, like if you're hearing from a leader once a week, like, you can tell, like, this is a good week, this is not a great week. Like, there's a familiarity that breeds. And I think that's an important aspect around how you win hearts and minds, like being vulnerable, but also accessible enough that people feel like they know the real you. And so I find for me, that's really compelling, but I think that's an important part too, as you think about really like capturing people's spirit. And I think like from the other thing that I guess I should have said, I set the bar really high. Like I think in an objective sense, like I tell my team, I was like, look, I'm gonna not like mince any words here. Like I believe in excellence. Like in everything we do, there's gonna be no question. We're gonna aim for excellent. Not perfection, but excellence. And so the bar is going to be high. And if that's not motivating to you, like this isn't the right team to be on.
Self-select out. Probably.
Yeah, because it was like my happy place is between an A and an A+. Like everybody knows. I was like, I do plenty of things that are not an A. But that's my happy place. And that's the point of like, how do you win hearts and minds? I was like, I want to be really clear. Like this is what we're trying to aim for, to be best in class. And so like this isn't the place to coast and just like come in and kind of like kick the tires and like walk out. That's not the ethos. And so you kind of get what you say you want, right?
Yeah.
And so I think being clear about what you want and then getting the hearts and minds from the people who buy into that.
Yeah.
That's, that it's like a little bit of a virtuous circle.
But I think that clarity is key. So there's no mismatch of expectations. Like we are AA+, and that is the level to which we work. And we will have fun. We'll enjoy the journey.
Yes.
But this is the standard.
This is where we're aiming, right? And I always say that in the sense of no one ever feels like they get there every day or on every topic. But it is a North Star of like, okay, I can go left or I can go right. I can do it this way or that way. it sort of elevates, I think, how people make decisions.
What would you say is your Achilles heel when it comes to leadership, the thing that you've been challenged by?
You know, the impatience or the notion of I can do it, right? Like I can answer that question. I can step in. My mind works really quickly and I process information pretty quickly. And so, that's not ready. Like I'll jump in and I'll do that, or however, that notion of like over functioning and being really quick to say like, yes, I like volunteer my body on the line for that. And I'd say it's an Achilles heel. It's probably was a strength, right, in many walks, and still can be a strength in certain moments. But as a leader, one of the things I really focus on is I want people to have enough space to take things on, even if they're not entirely sure that they're going to do a perfect job on it.
Yeah.
And I think as a leader, you have to consciously sometimes make that space, right? And like it might take a little bit longer. I may have done it 5 times. You've only done it 1 time. But how do I make sure to make that space? It's really important to me. As I told you, my team's really important to me. And so the Achilles heel is just that patience level of like, oh, I want to get it done today. And I want to check that off the list. And I know I can get it done. And I've done it 5 times. And like, it's okay. And to slow it down, to take the beat. And like when I was telling you earlier, do I really need to do this?
Yeah. Is it only uniquely I who can complete this task?
And am I taking a slow enough beat that for someone who doesn't want to like raise their hand and make a mistake or volunteer for something if they're not sure, is there a long enough pause, right, like the figurative pause, that someone feels the space to be like, okay, I can take that on, and I can have that meeting without you. And so I think that's something I'm conscious of, and very focused on recognizing those moments.
And I suppose it is recognizing in yourself where you're about to step in.
Totally.
And it's the catching it to be like, no, actually, I need to take people on the journey. Yeah. And also, I suppose it's allowing other people to learn and other people to feel they've got the voice at the table and they're empowered. But I see this with many leaders, because again, they're 4 or 5 steps ahead. And so it's a real, but I have to just slow it down.
Yeah.
Because I need other people's, to learn and take the space.
Yeah, and a lot of times there's so much that comes out of that you don't envision, right? Better solution, different dialogue, because people feel like there's an opportunity to, share or debate a topic. A lot of times as the leader, if you're the first voice in, like you've quashed like 5 other things that maybe someone would have said, and you don't know.
Yeah, you don't know.
You just don't know. And so, trying to kind of keep that openness so that people have like a very free forum to debate something and then weighing in after, like just that tempo of how that happens.
And I suppose you never know where some of the best ideas could come from.
No, there.
With the role that you're in, public company, everyone has a voice about you, like investors, shareholders, the public, but not everyone gets a vote. And yet people can say quite unkind things about leaders in today's world. Like, how do you deal with, I'm going to use the word scrutiny, and I don't know whether that's the right word, but the scrutiny that comes with the seat, because it's a very visible role.
Look, I think some of it is my natural personality. I've always wanted to focus on an outcome that I think is right, that I'm behind in terms of like, is this the best thing for the company, right? Top of the house. Is this the thing that you would do when no one's looking? How do you encourage that ethos? And so it's somewhat unemotional in a lot of respects. It's not about me. It's like, well, this is the seat, and this seat requires that type of engagement, or that's the way to have the best decision come out of the seat. So I don't really think much of it is about me. But I think also I'm pretty focused on what I can do. And I'm not on social media posting. I'm not looking for a lot of external validation. I definitely care about collaboration. But for me, most of the things that I think are really important are decisions based on the team here, the information that we have. And a lot of the people that I think have those voices of scrutiny, if I don't think they have a complete set of facts, it's very easy for me to be like, okay, I hear it. If the scrutiny or criticism or that type of dynamic is coming from someone who I think has as much information, that's really different, right? Those are moments where you're like, wait, I've got to take that feedback and really think about it and use it as something to improve on. And I know it's like sometimes it sounds like, oh yeah, I'm sure that's how it is. And then like it feels like not great in the moment. I think there are times where it doesn't feel great and you kind of have to hear that feedback or get that, that imprint back to you a couple times, right? From my seat, oftentimes you're like, okay, well, I don't listen to a lot of the noise because then I'd be over-rotating in multiple directions. But if I feel like I'm getting the same theme.
There's a pattern.
That I'm very quick to be like, wait, that's not the first time I've heard that. I really want to pay attention to that. And so I think about like, what's the context? What information does that person have? And is there like a theme of that maybe I've heard before? Those tend to elevate in my mind. But, I do think like these seats, they're about the seat. And
they're not about the
they're not about
personal.
the person. And I think if you've been in finance long enough, you're like, everybody loves you. And like one day I'll be gone. And someone else will have this seat.
Yeah.
And like people forget really quickly. It's like you're never as like exciting as whatever the success is. It has very little to do with you. And you're never as bad as the failure or the scrutiny either. I think, this world, you see a lot of people come and go. It's much more about, the role, the seat, the moment than it is about anything.
Yeah, it's
about me.
It reminds me, my younger son has got a podcast interviewing rugby players, and he interviewed this an England former captain who'd won the World Cup, and Arthur asked him, how do you cope with the media? And he goes, when people tell me I'm doing well, I take it with a pinch of salt. Exactly. He said, when people telling me I'm not doing a great job, I take it with a pinch of salt.
Exactly.
Unless, to your point, unless there's patterns. If there's a pattern and a theme, well, then this is a learning opportunity. There's, maybe something I need to address. But once it's something, his outliers, it's like, what? I can't take delivery of that. So I just have to unsubscribe to those comments like a social media account. I just have to disconnect. What's one thing no one's when you were like moving from engineering and like knowing what you know now? What's one thing no one told you about leadership in the early days that you wish they had?
So I was an engineer, right? We talked about that, and so I started investment banking as an analyst, very quantitative, a lot of Excel spreadsheets, and I always thought of myself as someone like I was the smart person with the substance, right? I don't want to sell. Like I don't do that. And somewhere along the way, you realize as you mature, you're like, oh wait, everything's a little bit of selling. Everything's explaining and persuading. Everything's how you motivate and communicate.
Our personal brand, that's the selling of who we are, our
totally.
value.
Or if you're trying to explain a vision, you're persuading someone that not only this is the vision, but this is a credible, thoughtful, the right vision, right? If you're talking to an investor, you're explaining like, here's what I think our differentiation is, and here's what we think the investment thesis is. If you're talking to, someone about an organizational change, you're like, here's what I'm seeing as your strengths and your gaps, and here's how we're making that change. Every element is some element of, communicating, but in some like very crude sense, there's an element of selling embedded in that. Influencing. And I think as someone who grew up and in like a much more analytical environment and is introverted, I was like, I don't need that. That's like, that's for you. Like you go to the client, I don't need to do that. And somewhere along the way, I was like, oh, I'm actually better at it than I would have thought. And I don't think of it as selling. I think of it as explaining. But I just don't think that in my view of leadership, the how you make someone feel, the how you communicate would have had such a high weighting as it actually does in my experience. It would have been like, okay, here's the what, and there's the how, and it's much more here's the how, and obviously like some what as well. But I just like that's another example of something I would have like totally had backwards, 30 years ago.
But I think often at university people teach you the what. They don't teach you about the how, but how you make people feel. If we go back to feelings, when you tell a story, you could sell it say it multiple different ways, but it's how you there'll be certain connections and feelings and emotions. So the how is so critical, and I think often people prepare the agenda, slide, they don't think, okay, well, what do I want the audience to feel at the end of this? And knowing that, how do I need to be? What are the levers I need to flex so people arrive at the desired state?
Yeah. And I think as any human, you're constantly can get better at that. The more types of people you interact with, the more situations you're in. And so it's like this internal learning loop, right? Or it's this internal experiment. You're like, that worked, that didn't work, that worked, that didn't work. But it's really rewarding. And I think, as a leader, you're leading people. You're not leading robots and widgets. I mean, not yet. So it's probably the singular most important skill to really try to hone.
Yeah, the what and the how.
Yeah. So.
And what is we talked about advice earlier, like your mentor gave you some advice. What's a piece of universal advice you give to mentees, or you feel you've given to many people in the past?
So it's different in a work context in terms of like a mentee or someone coming in. Like in that context, for me, the single biggest piece of advice I was given and that I try to leave people with is like dream bigger. Talk about what you're interested in and just dream bigger and let other people dream for you. And so the way that manifests is, when you're a few years out of school, you're like, oh, I think I want to do X because you see someone else doing X, or there's a box on an org chart or like some function that's listed, some job description. It's something that exists and you're like, oh, I can see myself doing that.
Yeah.
Every job that I have had past the age of, the first 10 years of my career was created. It was not a box that existed before I got there, and it probably didn't exist after I got there. It was created based on, you want exposure to this, and you're really good at this, and we have a problem that looks like that, and we're going to put those together, and we're going to create this opportunity. You can't even dream big enough, right? Because you don't have the visibility or the peripheral vision to do that at different points in your career. And so when I say like, okay, you should dream bigger, but you should let other people dream for you, I mean, it's not going to be a box that exists. If you just talk a little bit about what you want exposure to, the dreams, the things, the opportunities that can come your way can be just way bigger than anything you would put together because everybody around you might have different context.
Yeah. I love what you said there. That feels like a chapter of a book, like dream big, but, let others dream for you as well. Because there's a duality of it that like both are important. I love that. Look, one of the questions I often get asked about when people say you work very closely with C-suite leaders, they always want to know what's the secret sauce? Like, what are the things?
Tell me, what's the secret sauce?
What is the secret sauce? So I'm going to ask you. And one of the questions, like, what do they do in their mornings? Like, do they get up at 5 a.m.? Do they meditate? Do they exercise? Do they read, like Jamie Dimon's known to read, like, all the papers? When you wake up in the morning, like, the first hour of your day, what does that look like?
Oh, my God, I'm going to sound like such a boring human. So, my day is typically, like, all pretty frenetic. It's back to back and busy in a work context. And so my morning hour is the time of day where it's just quiet and really grounded in all the things away from external sort of variables and factors that I know start as soon as my day starts. So, I typically wake up at 6. I have a small dog who's just the best dopamine hit that you could possibly have.
Do you allow them to sleep in your bed?
She sleeps, not only does she sleep in my bed, I mean, she migrates her way to 6 a.m. Her head's on my pillow like she's a person.
Hey, Ma!
Yeah, I was like, oh, this is so embarrassing. But I wake up, I go downstairs, I make coffee. It's typically kind of dim or dark out. I put music on. If it's cold, I get the fire going.
What music do you play?
I play I would say modern folk. It's kind of quiet, or sometimes I play classical piano, but I'll do a wide range. I have a wide range of Motown things. But in the morning, in that moment, it's typically quiet.
Yeah. And
kind of mellow. And the dog sits on my lap. You've got the fire, the music, and the lights just coming up. There's not a lot of other lighting. And I have that cup of coffee. And it's just my time to really feel that quiet, serene sort of peace. And sometimes I might read a couple articles. Sometimes, I might read a book. I try not to do a barrage of emails. So like I will wake up, I will triage and be like, is anything like on fire?
Yeah.
But then I try to put that down and really just have, I'd say like 45 minutes to an hour of like having a cup of coffee, relaxing, and, you know, kind of just thinking about like getting my mental order, like what am I going to get done for the day? What matters?
Yeah.
You know, what else is going on in the evening? What do I want to be home for? But it's like, it's my way of sort of organizing, but doing it in a really like gentle, quiet way. And I feel like for me, it allows me to kind of build that energy to then just like go out and like,
Was the tethering, you used the word tethering earlier. It feels like it's a tether.
Yeah. And also like the day takes energy, right? And you're constantly interacting, and you're interacting with variables that have nothing to do with what you thought they were going to be at the beginning of the day, right? It's all just like jump ball, new thing.
Whack-a-mole.
Yeah, a little whack-a-mole, but like in a good way.
Yeah.
And I want to be my best version for other people. And so that's like my hour of like, it's just me and like only my variables. And so that's, you know,
and it's
that's
space.
my hour. It is. It's space.
Well, look, I have a very quick fire round.
Oh my goodness.
So these are like single words or short sentences.
I'm coming up with single words and short sentences.
Yes, you are. You are. One lesson your children have learned from you.
Hard work never goes wasted.
One thing you want to demonstrate so they're a chip off the old block.
Really taking care to treat everyone really well, not just the people who are like the CEO of the company, but every level, whether it's the grounds person, the waitress, you know, someone who's cleaning, like treat everyone with the care that you want to be treated with.
Love that. What's on your nightstand?
A few books, always a glass of water.
They're going to say wine for a second.
No wine, but really it's like a few books and not much else.
Favorite book?
I don't know if it's my favorite book because I have trouble picking, but I just read The Correspondent, which is, I don't know if you've read it.
I haven't read it.
It's a recent book, very good. The main character is like somewhat aloof, and I don't want to give away the book, but she basically writes letters instead of having a lot of like face-to-face interactions.
Okay.
And there was something that I found like really interesting about that character. And in a weird way, I think probably because I'm introverted, a little bit of like, oh, I totally get, I don't write letters, but I totally get that mindset around, you know, how you really want to take time and interact. That was not very short.
No, that's fine. We can rule break.
The Correspondent.
The Correspondent. A Netflix series you'd recommend?
Oh, goodness. Netflix. I got to come back to that one.
Do you know, I've just watched Emily in Paris. Have you seen it?
Oh, yes. Well,
and I hadn't seen it. Like I watched two series in a weekend when I wasn't well. It's
really fun.
It's beautiful.
So you said Netflix. So if we go to streaming, I think we just started. There's a new season of Shrinking, which I find really interesting.
Shrinking.
Yeah, you gotta. I think it's on Apple.
One thing your parents would be proud of.
Oh, my parents are glorious. They're proud of everything. They're just literally everything. You know, I think they're proud of the balance that I've been able to strike in terms of having a career and being really dedicated to the family. My parents prize family, but they both were doctors, including my mom. And so I think they have a recognition on how hard it is. So balance, being able to balance, because it takes constant juggling. It's not just picking.
And what's the lesson you think you learned from them?
You know, I think the hard work lesson, that hard work never goes wasted, is my mom's saying. Mm-hmm. And, you know, they both were physicians. They worked so hard and relentlessly. And I never felt uncared for, but there were times where I was a latchkey kid letting myself in at home. But it was the sense of if you want things, if it's good to have goals, but like be willing to put in the hard work for it. Don't be afraid of hard things.
Yeah.
And so I think I learned that from them. There are things, it's not about just like success or anything, but in any walk, like it's okay for it to be hard. It's okay for you not to get it the first time. But if you put in the effort, and that's why I say they're proud of everything. If you put in the effort, like there's nothing that should be unattainable. That mindset, I think, was really like their immigrant mindset. They're like, you can work your way up to anything, get anything, do anything. It's all about the effort you want to put into it.
Yeah, I do tell my children hard work is the minimum, like it's the minimum. You know, I won't, if you put in the work, if you don't get the grades that you hope, but like hard work is a minimum.
Yeah.
But like my version of hard work.
It's funny. It's like hard work never gets wasted as my mom's. And then sometimes I kind of tweaked it a little bit. I was like, hard work brings good luck. Like, do you know what I mean? It's like, just believe me. Because when the kids are like, oh, I don't want to stay up and do this thing. I'm like, it's going to bring good luck. Like, trust me.
And look at me. I'm like an example of just having applied myself. And last one, like great leaders, I think have a philosophy of continuous improvement. Like it's that there's always room for incremental growth. What does a better version of you this year look like?
A slower version. Like really slowing down and allowing myself to think about, do I need to do it? Not react, making sure to make space for other people. But it's a slower version. Not slow with a cane, hopefully, but just that slower version where you get to look at that seaplane level before you decide, where you're going to go scuba dive.
And how will you know, like if you and I are having a coffee or a glass of wine next January, how will you know if you succeeded? Like what will you be celebrating?
I think it's not an accomplishment, but it's a pace. I don't know if you ever played an instrument. I played an instrument when I was younger, and I was having this conversation with someone. There's a flow in music, right? Like an adagio, like a slow kind of lyrical movement. Think about like a wave in an ocean. And then there's this like staccato dynamic, and certain music has that. And so I think, if we were having a glass of wine, it's the energy kind of oozes out, which is that feeling of there's pace, there's room. It's not just like a fast conversation. And you know that when you're engaging with people, when you're like, okay, great, we had like, a quick wrap up and now we're done. And you get into that very superficial layer. And then when you're having a conversation with someone, and usually it's like when they order the second drink, so the second glass of wine, where things unfurl, right? And you have a deeper conversation. It's trying to get to that place more frequently. Yeah. So we'll judge if we get to the second glass of wine.
And I think what we put our attention on expands.
Yeah.
And so when we're focused on achieving certain goals and we're measuring it and we're, is it working? If it's working, what do I need to double down on? And but equally, if it's not working, where am I getting in my own way? So I'm a strong believer of, if we put our minds to something, we'll get to our destination. But look, this has been so insightful.
Thank you so much. It's so fun.
I thoroughly enjoyed having this conversation. I've taken many lessons and insights away. So thank you for bringing your full self into it. I'm going to be listening to it back many times over, taking away the key nuggets. So thank you for sharing your
Thank you so much
with us. Pleasure.
If you want to see the full episode, please do look at Apple and Spotify under Stratospheric Leaders, or go to YouTube where it will be under Georgie Dickens. I hope you enjoyed the full episode. There are so many great sound bites shared.